It was already well past midnight by the time I said my goodbyes to Emily. The air was biting, that kind of chill that creeps under your skin and lingers. I didn't mind the cold though, I was too distracted by the lingering thoughts of the night. We'd spent a quiet evening in her cozy apartment, tucked away on the edge of town. The smell of her perfume still clung to my jacket as I pulled the collar up, trying to shield myself from the increasing cold. I had walked her home earlier, and now, with the streets nearly deserted, it was my turn to make the trek back to my place. Emily had insisted that I take the longer, safer route, but I wasn't in the mood for that. I was tired, and honestly, I just wanted to get back to my bed as quickly as possible. Plus, the shortcut through the old building in the woods would be faster. I'm not going to lie, I've always been a little creeped out by that building. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's the kind of place people talk about in hushed voices. The rumors always floated around, stories about it being haunted, about strange noises echoing from the walls at night. People said it was cursed, that no one who ever ventured too close came back quite the same. But to me, it was just an old, run-down building in the woods. Nothing more. I'd passed it dozens of times without anything strange happening. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that taking the shortcut through the woods wasn't the smartest idea. But at the same time, I didn't want to waste time walking around the long way. The path through the woods was always quiet, and the moonlight filtering through the trees gave everything an eerie, almost cinematic feel. It was the kind of night where you could almost convince yourself that nothing could go wrong. I pulled out my phone, quickly checking the time. It was nearly 1 a.m. Emily had insisted I be careful, especially since it was so late. She said something about how the forest felt different at night, how it changed, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to sound like a kid and be overly cautious. The woods grew darker as I made my way deeper into the trees, the familiar path leading me to the abandoned building. The sound of my footsteps was muffled by the damp ground beneath, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. For the first time tonight, I was starting to feel uneasy. The building loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible against the sky. I could just make out the shape of the old structure, a crumbling, three-story brick building, its windows shattered, the door barely hanging on its hinges. Overgrown vines and weeds had claimed the property long ago, creeping up the sides of the building, as though nature itself was trying to reclaim it. As I stepped closer to the entrance, I noticed how silent everything had become. It wasn't the usual peaceful silence of the woods at night, it felt almost oppressive. The usual nighttime sounds, the wind, the rustling of the leaves, seemed to have been swallowed up by the thick air around me. Something felt off, but I kept moving forward, my boots crunching on the gravel. It was just an old building, I told myself. People like to tell stories, that's all. I paused at the doorway, staring into the pitch-black interior of the building. It felt like something was watching me from within, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back. With one final glance behind me, I stepped inside. The air in the building was heavy, musty, and stale. It smelled like decay, like something ancient that had been forgotten by time. The walls were covered in peeling paint, the floor covered in layers of dust. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could make out the remnants of what the place used to be: broken furniture, smashed windows, shattered glass scattered across the floor. It was clear no one had been here in years. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and continued walking, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the walls, unnervingly loud in the silence. The building felt colder inside than out, like the temperature dropped the moment I stepped through the door. I could feel my breath turning to mist in the air, though the chill didn't seem to be coming from the outside. That's when I heard it, just a slight sound at first. A low thud from somewhere above me, like something had fallen. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. My pulse quickened. I strained my ears, trying to listen, but the silence returned, thick and suffocating. I took another step forward. Another thud. Then, without warning, a sharp crack echoed from above, followed by a loud, heavy thump. Something slammed into the back of my head. The world tilted, and my legs buckled beneath me. Everything went black. I woke up in the same place I'd fallen, but it felt different now, disorienting. My head throbbed painfully, and a cold sweat clung to my skin. I tried to move but couldn't. My limbs were stiff, and when I attempted to push myself up, my hands met something solid. A hard surface. I froze, trying to make sense of the world around me. Everything was pitch black. The kind of darkness that feels thick, like it's pressing in from all sides. I blinked rapidly, but no matter how hard I tried to adjust, I couldn't see a thing. The last thing I remembered was walking through the doorway, hearing that strange noise, and then, nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my pulse. Something was wrong. I should have been outside, heading back to my place. I should have been. A loud scraping sound broke the silence, coming from somewhere in front of me. My heart leapt into my throat, and I jerked backward, hitting the chair I was sitting in. Wait, chair. Why was I sitting in a chair? I was still in the same spot. I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel it, a faint, rough texture beneath my fingertips. Wood. Old wood. The chair creaked beneath me as I shifted, trying to push myself up. My legs were weak, and I nearly fell, but I managed to steady myself and stand. I could hear my breath, quick, shallow, and that's when I noticed it. The noises. At first, they were faint, like a far-off whisper, but they grew louder with each passing second. Screams. Horrible, blood-curdling screams that seemed to come from every direction at once. The kind of screams that made your skin crawl, that rattled your bones and made your heart hammer against your chest. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and an icy chill gripped my spine. Were these just sounds? Or was someone else in here with me? The screams were coming from deep within the building. It sounded like someone was in pain. But it didn't stop there. There was another sound. Footsteps. Someone was running. I couldn't tell if they were getting closer or moving farther away, but the footsteps were fast, too fast. It felt like they were closing in on me, but from all angles. I took a few unsteady steps forward, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. Was this a prank? Some sick joke by a group of maniacs trying to get a rise out of me? No, this was too real, too intense for that. And besides, I'd been knocked unconscious. I didn't know how long I'd been out. The silence hung heavy for a moment, and I tried to steady my breathing. If I was going to get out of here, I needed to stay calm. I couldn't panic. But then, I heard it again. A scream, closer this time, followed by an agonizing, almost inhuman wail. I looked around, but it was impossible to see anything. The darkness wrapped itself around me, suffocating every sense. The screams, no, they weren't screams anymore. They had changed into something deeper, more primal, like an animal's cry for help. A sound that shouldn't exist in the human world. I gritted my teeth, trying to focus, trying to shake off the terror gnawing at the edges of my mind. There had to be an exit. I just needed to find it. But as I took another step forward, the building seemed to close in on me. The walls felt like they were shifting, and the air felt colder, heavier. The oppressive silence that had fallen after the screams was worse than the noise itself. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you weren't alone anymore, that something was watching you. Then, I heard it. A soft shuffle, followed by the unmistakable sound of breathing. I turned, the blood draining from my face as my heart skipped a beat. Someone, or something, was standing behind me. The air felt thick, suffocating. I opened my mouth to shout, to run, but no sound came out. I turned to face it. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and impossibly thin. Its silhouette was just barely visible in the darkness, but there was something off about it, something wrong. Its arms were too long, its legs too thin. But the worst part? Its eyes. Two glowing, piercing eyes, like molten embers in the dark, fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach drop. The sound of its breathing grew louder, more labored, like it was straining to draw in air. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching me, its glowing eyes the only things that stood out in the pitch-black void. I took a step back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. It took one slow step forward, its face still hidden in the dark, but its eyes, those eyes, never left mine. And then, it spoke. "Run." The word was distorted, almost like a hiss, but it was clear enough. I didn't need any more encouragement. I spun on my heel and bolted that I ran. The sound of my boots slamming against the floor echoed in my ears, mixing with the sound of my own breath, ragged, panicked, each inhalation shallow. The building stretched out before me, an endless labyrinth of crumbling walls and broken doorways, but no matter how fast I moved, it felt like I was going in circles. The air grew heavier with each step, thick and suffocating, as if the very walls themselves were closing in on me. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The feeling of those eyes watching me, burning into my skin, was still too fresh. I couldn't shake the image of that figure, its glowing eyes fixed on me, its twisted, inhuman shape just beyond my reach. My legs screamed at me to stop, to slow down, but I couldn't. I had to get out. I had to. Crash. I stumbled, my foot catching on something in the dark. My hand shot out to brace myself, but I was falling, the cold, jagged floor slamming into my palms as I tried to catch my balance. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up, but there was no time. That sound, it was getting closer. The figure was following me. I could hear its footsteps now, too, dragging behind me, slower but more deliberate. It wasn't running, but it didn't need to. The way it moved, its unnatural gait, was enough to make my skin crawl. I rounded a corner, nearly tripping over a pile of old debris, and kept going. But the building felt like it was alive, its layout shifting, doors and hallways twisting in ways that made no sense. I was running blind, my eyes straining to adjust to the darkness, my heart racing with each passing second. Every time I thought I was nearing an exit, I'd come across another dead end, another boarded-up door, another empty room that offered no escape. The screams came again, louder now, echoing from every corner of the building. They were no longer distant. They were inside my head, gnawing at my sanity. The sounds felt like they were chasing me too, pushing me forward, forcing me to keep moving. They were the screams of people, or something, suffering, but they weren't human anymore. They weren't real. They were distorted, like some kind of cruel mockery of a human cry. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. My legs were burning, my lungs desperate for air. I had to stop. I had to figure out a way out of this place. I stumbled into another room, a wide, empty space, the walls lined with long-forgotten machinery and broken tools. The air was thick with the smell of rust and mold. I skidded to a stop, breathing heavily, my chest heaving. My mind was a blur, but something in my gut told me to keep moving, to never stop. The floor creaked beneath me as I took another step, the sound unnatural, too loud in the silence. And then, there it was again, those footsteps. Not mine. Not the sound of me running. I turned to face the door at the far end of the room, my body frozen in place. The door, had it always been there? I couldn't remember. But there was no time to think. The sound was closer. I could hear it, a scraping, dragging sound, like someone, or something, was crawling across the floor toward me. I didn't wait to see what it was. I bolted again. My breath was ragged, but it wasn't enough to drown out the sound that echoed from behind me. The footsteps, slower now but still relentless, weren't the only thing I could hear. There was something else, something far worse. The sound of heavy, labored breathing. It came in harsh, uneven gasps, like someone, or something, was suffocating. Each breath was drawn closer to me, each one colder and more oppressive than the last. It sounded like it was right behind me, like it was on the verge of catching up. I was sure I could feel the breath on the back of my neck, the hairs standing up on end. It wasn't just the footsteps anymore, it was the rhythm of it, the rasping breath that seemed to echo in the depths of my skull. I had to move. I had to get away from that sound. But my legs felt like lead, each step slower than the last. The darkness around me felt like it was swallowing me whole, the walls closing in tighter with each passing second. I couldn't tell where I was anymore. The building had become a maze of broken rooms, twisted corridors, and abandoned halls, none of them leading anywhere. I thought I had passed the same room at least 3 times now, but I couldn't remember. I had no sense of direction. The fear was taking over. Then, out of nowhere, a voice, a raspy whisper, cut through the air. "Turn around." It was soft, like a breath, but it was clear. It was coming from behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I felt my body freeze in place. My heart stopped beating for a split second, my mind screaming at me to move, to do something, but my feet were stuck in place. It felt like I was glued to the floor, held captive by the voice, by the sound of that breathing. And then I heard it. A loud bang followed by the screech of metal. The door I had passed moments ago, was it slamming shut? I whipped around, panic flooding my body, my heart racing even faster. The hallway behind me was empty, but the sound of breathing was louder, closer, almost suffocating. It was as though the air was thickening, becoming harder to breathe in. Every breath felt like it was being squeezed out of me. Move. My mind screamed the word, but I was paralyzed by the terror gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay in this hallway, in this building. I staggered backward, my feet dragging, eyes darting around, searching for any hint of an exit. The pressure on my chest was unbearable. I was suffocating. My vision blurred, the edges of the room closing in as the shadows seemed to grow, darkening every corner. Then I heard it again. A sharp, guttural scream, no, not a scream. It was more like an animal's howl, primal, full of pure agony. It tore through the silence like a jagged knife, sending a fresh wave of terror through me. I knew, then, that I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone at all, that I didn't need any more warning. The moment that scream echoed through the building, I snapped back to reality. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. My mind raced, my body trembling as I forced my legs to move. My feet pounded against the cold, cracked floor, but no matter how fast I ran, it felt like the building itself was stretching, keeping me trapped. I turned a corner, desperate for anything that might lead me to freedom, but found nothing, just more darkness, more endless, decaying walls. A rusted light fixture hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly in the thick air, casting long, haunting shadows across the room. It felt like I was running through a nightmare, where the walls were closing in and I couldn't wake up. The breathing, it was louder now. I could feel it like a weight on my chest, each inhale a suffocating gasp, each exhale like a low growl. I could hear something moving behind me. Not footsteps, but something heavier, slower. A dragging sound, as though something, or someone, was crawling across the floor. I didn't dare look back. If I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep going. I glanced to my left. The hallway ahead of me split into 2 more dark corridors, both leading deeper into the labyrinth. I hesitated for a second, my heart racing, then chose the left. I had no idea why, I couldn't make decisions anymore. I was running on instinct alone. Suddenly, the air grew colder. I could feel it, a sharp drop in temperature that made my breath fog in the air. It was as if something was getting closer, closing the distance between us. I ran faster, my legs burning, my chest tight. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out everything except the terrifying reality of my situation. Bang! A loud thud echoed behind me. Something heavy had struck the floor. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I reached the end of the hallway. It was another dead end. A room. The walls were lined with old, decaying shelves, covered in layers of dust and forgotten debris. There was nothing in this room but darkness and the lingering scent of decay. No exit. No windows. I was trapped. I whirled around, my back against the wall, eyes darting to the doorway. There was no sign of movement, but the breathing was getting louder. Closer. And then I saw it. A shadow. It flickered across the far wall, just a glimpse, a figure, tall, thin, impossibly so. The same glowing eyes from before. I froze. I couldn't move. It was there. It was right there. The figure stepped into the room, its long arms reaching toward me, the sound of its breath sharp and rasping. I could hear the dry rustling of its movements, the scrape of its feet dragging across the floor. It was slow, deliberate, but every movement was like a predator stalking its prey. And then, it spoke again. Run. The voice was even more distorted this time, like it was coming from deep within the earth. But it wasn't just the voice. It was the air itself, suffocating, cold, and thick, pressing in on me from every side. Without thinking, I turned and bolted. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just had to get away. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted, every corner of my mind screaming for me to escape, to find a way out. But I could feel it, right behind me. That presence. That thing. I didn't dare look back. I didn't dare slow down. I could hear it now, the scrape of something long and sharp dragging across the floor behind me, growing louder with each passing second. I pushed myself harder, my feet slipping on the uneven floor, but I didn't dare slow down. The air was thick with dread, and every breath I took felt like I was breathing in pure terror. My heart pounded so violently in my chest that I thought I might collapse from the sheer pressure. The building was alive. That was the only way I could describe it. The walls seemed to warp and shift, each hallway stretching farther, doors slamming shut behind me as if the very structure itself was closing in. I turned a corner, a sharp, narrow turn, and nearly ran straight into a wall, but I barely managed to stop in time. I gasped for air, my breath ragged and uneven. The sound of my own breathing was drowned out by the heavy, dragging footsteps behind me. The thing was getting closer. I could feel it, the oppressive presence in the darkness, closing the gap between us. It wasn't just chasing me, it was hunting me. And then, I heard it again, the scream. The inhuman wail that split the silence like a blade, raw and desperate. It was louder now, closer than ever, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. My legs were giving out, my body on the verge of collapse, but I kept pushing forward. I didn't have a choice. I reached another hallway, narrow, suffocating, and there it was again. The shadow. Flickering at the edges of my vision. The tall, thin figure with those glowing eyes. It was watching me, following me, getting closer with every step I took. I turned another corner, hoping for an escape, but this hallway was different. It felt wrong. The walls were covered in something, sticky. My fingers brushed against the surface as I ran, and the feeling sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't want to know what it was, but I knew it wasn't good. The shadow moved again. A flash of its figure, just a blur in the corner of my eye. I couldn't make out its details, but I knew it was there, right behind me. The glowing eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, unyielding. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps stopped. The breathing, too, had faded. I stopped, my entire body tense, every sense on alert. The silence was more terrifying than any sound. It was as if the building itself had stopped breathing, holding its breath, waiting for something. My own breath was shallow, quick, and I dared not make a sound. And then I heard it. The softest of whispers, right behind me, so quiet I wasn't sure if it was real. "Turn around." I didn't. I couldn't. But the voice, oh, the voice, it was almost like it was inside my head. It echoed, twisted, turning the words into something sinister, something unrecognizable. I backed up slowly, my feet scraping against the floor, and then it hit me. The wall. There was no more room to run. I slammed into it, my breath leaving my chest in a rush, my head spinning from the impact. I was trapped. There was no way out now. I turned to face the doorway behind me. I had no choice but to face whatever was coming. And then it stepped into the room. The figure. The same tall, thin shadow. The same glowing eyes that burned into me with unnatural intensity. I could see it now. It was closer than ever before, and this time, it wasn't standing still. It was moving. Its arms stretched out in front of it, long and spindly, the fingers curled like claws, reaching for me. It was walking slowly, deliberately, each step making the floor creak under its weight. The space between us closed with every breath. I could hear its rasping, tortured breath, echoing through the room. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I was cornered, and the only thing left was the thing in front of me, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. I turned again, desperate to escape, but it was too late. It lunged that I didn't even have time to scream. The moment the figure lunged, my heart froze, and every muscle in my body locked up. There was no escape, no way out. It was like a nightmare come to life, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The darkness, the suffocating air, the monstrous thing chasing me, all of it was too much. I felt the cold, skeletal fingers brush against my skin, and that was it. My body finally gave way to pure terror. I turned, pushing myself forward as fast as I could, but my legs weren't obeying. My breath was coming in short, desperate gasps, my throat tight as if I couldn't breathe, couldn't escape. The sound of its footsteps echoed louder in my ears, closer, closer still. I ran blindly, stumbling, until... bang! I hit something solid, something unforgiving. A wall. My head slammed into the hard surface, and everything went black. I woke up lying on my back, the cold ground beneath me pulling me back into the nightmare. My vision was blurry, my body aching like I had been dragged through hell. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog from my mind, but it didn't help. There was something wrong, everything felt wrong. I was outside. How had I gotten here? I was no longer in the building. The air was different, fresher. The moonlight bathed everything in a pale glow. I was lying in front of the entrance to the abandoned building, the one I had tried to escape from hours ago. But something else was horribly wrong. My clothes were torn to shreds, hanging off me in tatters. My body was covered in blood, my own blood. I didn't know how it had gotten there. I didn't know how I had ended up outside, at the entrance, but I could feel it in my bones. Whatever had happened in that building, whatever I had just lived through, wasn't over. I slowly got to my feet, my body shaking. The pain in my head was almost unbearable, but I couldn't focus on that. I couldn't focus on anything except the overwhelming, suffocating dread that lingered in the air. I stumbled away from the building, my eyes flicking back to it, the entrance now an empty, silent void. But as I took one last look at the shadowed doorway, I could have sworn I saw those glowing eyes again. And then, everything went black once more. End.